Welcome back to Hacker Hangouts on a Saturday morning, and it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. We're talking about issues and actually just so many of the ridiculous, amazing failures we've had over the years. And the story started with was the ransomware story that kicked it off, or was there another
Yeah,
one?
it was the ransomware story, that's a really awesome that's a really awesome cell phone.
So I was developing. So there was a couple of my buddies who were developing endpoint security. And it was right when ransomware was becoming a thing, we'll say, and no one was really detecting ransomware because most ransomware isn't like it's not a malicious function. You're running RSA encryption, you're running AES encryption. Like it's not a runtime routine where it's like dumping LSA secrets or something where the moment there's no right anything on the system should interact with that where encryption is. So they needed something to be able to test the tools they were creating because they didn't want to run detonate actual ransomware. So I was like, this is a fun project. I'll go ahead and create something. I had never, and I chose a terrible language for it. I was like, I'll do it in C# because a lot of clients were using web portals through ASP.NET. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to create one using that. I'll set up a full-blown web portal. For the fun of it, I did the whole Bitcoin integration, but I wanted to develop in a VM because you want to do it in a VM. And instead of developing the code, I just did the whole thing in the VM. And then I was like, you know what? I'll develop it on my host system. I'll detonate it on the VM. But every time I went to compile it, it was really annoying to have to move it over to the VM. I probably should have trickled this farther at the end, but I used a share between my host system and that to detonate it. And originally I had it set up where I'm like, okay, every time I detonate, it's just going to encrypt a single folder on the desktop. But then as it matured, I wanted to go, okay, let's do a full-blown test. So it encrypts every drive and then enumerates all the drives. And I actually expanded it. It's going to enumerate all the drives. It's going to encrypt all the drives. It's going to send the connection and all of that. I ran it. And I completely forgot about the share, which was hooked up, which had all the code for the ransomware. I had backups and all of that, but I ran it. And immediately I recognized what I did. I was like, oh my gosh, I just encrypted my entire share. And it was like the downloads folder. So it wasn't a big one because I just ended up folding because that was the easiest way to share it. But encrypting the entire downloads folder, I'm like, it's fine. It's okay. I have a web server online, so I have the key. I'll just go ahead and I can decrypt it. So I go to load up the decryption routine and the decryption function, which is in the code I just encrypted. So the decryption routine is now locked behind, and oh my gosh. So I had to go back to a previous commit, restore that, and had to recode from memory all the extra pieces I put in because it's interesting. So you might remember this in Darknet. Do you remember the base 4000 like Unicode text
No.
encryptor I made? All right. So
Dude, I remember that, and I remember looking at it and being like, yeah, I'm good. I'm gonna go do something else.
so in short, it was something box.net started and I took on, but in short, it was if you encrypt a file name, it's a really bad way of doing it because if you encrypt a file name, it goes longer. Since you have a key and everything like that, it goes longer. And in Windows, if you want to encrypt file names along with a ransomware, which I was like, oh, that'd be a fun thing to do, it will make the file name too long, and it will you get Windows errors because you can't rename the files that way. Box came up with a way of hiding and kind of obfuscating file names, and then I took it and applied it to with an encryption decryption routine. Effectively, it takes ASCII, turns it into octal, takes the octal, does the lookup of Unicode, so you can kind of rotate it in octal and then go find the Unicode alternative. So your file names will end up being emojis, and it tended to be mostly Asian symbols, just because that was the biggest bulk it would end up hitting in for the numbers it would typically hit. But I couldn't even find the file that I needed to, which had my encryption routine because it had rotated all the file extensions and everything. So yeah, in short, I encrypted all of my own files on the share. I had to then rewrite the entire decryption routine And then I scared the crap out of myself when I ran it the first time and it didn't work. And then had to go again line by line going, okay, what was and it was the file names. So I had to rerun, now write new code. But yeah, it was, I ransomwared myself with my own code. That was among my dumbest
I mean,
moments.
that is a top tier self own in the legitimate hacker sense of like here's the real question. This begs the question: why exactly were you developing your own ransomware?
So
And who is it that I remember had an open source ransomware solution on GitHub? Was that you?
I did have one. Yes. It was the main reason was because they wanted to test their endpoint software. So there wasn't any
right.
there wasn't any great ways of testing with known ransomware because you would want to, okay, decrypt it. I'm going to change my signature because most of the ways it was being detected back then was how you pretty much take a heuristic of how many files are on your system and how quickly are things being encrypted.
Yeah.
Or you would have,
Yeah,
they would sometimes do Easter egg or eggs somewhere where the egg would get hit, and then it would be a way of detecting a canary in a coal mine type of thing. They'd have a canary, and if the canary got hit, something malicious is happening. But yet, by the time I will say, by the time I released it on GitHub, I knew it would be used for malicious things, but I had a zillion backdoors inside my own software where if you ran the portal, it would notify me. So I'd actually get a link of who was setting up the portal. So there was a lot of stuff like that in it where if a script kiddie grabbed it, they'd miss it. If someone sophisticated used it, there would be an easy way of getting around it.
Did you ever get notifications of it? Now I'm just curious.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I got about 50 notifications that people were running it. I did get one report that someone was using it maliciously, and then I ended up just pulling it down. At that point, a lot of new ones had come out, and other people had done this type of like, here's malicious ones. So like, my fun was taken. Ultimately, it's not that hard of a piece of software to write.
No, it's like troll through a file share or a file system and just open, write, delete, open, write, delete. Yeah, it's like it's the most trivial way you can. This is why, not to get political. This is why when people are like, we need to control hacking tools and treat them as non-exportable things. It's like, guys, it's software. Like, you're not going to control this. It's a matter of like, if you can think it, you can write it. It's such a bizarre thought.
Wasn't it New York? You had sent me an interesting article that there was, again,
yeah,
it's a bill that's put out, more than likely will never pass. This is how most things. It's like, here is a bill.
This isn't even the first time it came up. So in response to the recent, we'll say, I wouldn't even call it political violence. In response to the recent violence that occurred in New York, a New York senator, or I don't know how their state system works. Somebody in New York proposed a bill to require background checks for anyone who was going to buy a 3D printer. And it's like, okay, could you also do that for like drill presses and lathes, because those actually make weapons? But no one's arguing that. They're like, oh, those are real tools. This one's scary because the cyber people use it. It's like,
always,
come on, guys.
You had mentioned that. So there was a hacker space near us. That was where I built the table and things like that. And there was talk. They're like, oh, we can build this. We'd build this. And it always amazes me at what point do you have to register it? I think it's the lower you have to register in like in an AR platform or something like that. And that was always amazing to me that like you can, all the other pieces you can create, then the plastic piece, which actually is 3D printable, that always blew my mind of like, but it makes sense in some ways. You have to register it at some point.
Yeah. And the way it actually works online is like you can sell incomplete lowers, and they're called 80% lowers, where you can buy one that is not considered a weapon, and then you like take a drill press to it, put like 2 holes in it, and boom, now it's functional. And it's like, are you serious? Like, are you serious? That like, yeah. And we're talking about outlawing 3D printers. Like that's the level of dumb we're at. But yeah, like, come on.
So with this, it had me also thinking about other stories. I mean, you had a couple stories too that when we were bouncing around the topic.
So yeah, so like lockpicking is always a really fun one. Cell phones and like cell phones. instead of cell phones. So you go to DEF CON, maybe it's your first time, and you find the lockpicking village, and you pop your first master lock, which can be unlocked with, I think McNally official demonstrates, a master lock can be unlocked with another master lock by just whacking them against each other is a good example. But like you go and you learn, you're like, oh, I picked like a spool pin, and I picked this, and you go home and you feel, all powerful. Like you can not open any lock, but you can open a good chunk of locks that you'll find in the wild, right? And then I've started collecting locks. Yeah, I have a small lock collection. I've got a good set of lock picks that are sitting on my desk. One year, my wife bought me a really nice holder for my lockpick toolkit, and it's like, yeah, just kind of playing show and tell here. It's a nice little leather holder. I got a good set of tension wrenches for different scenarios and things like that. And so my wife knows I can pick locks. And it very rarely comes up that someone actually needs a lock picked. And I don't even test this. Like, I don't want to know how insecure my front door is. All I know is that locks are not a great way to keep most people who want to get into a place out of said place. So it's really there to keep honest people honest. That's fine. So I don't really even test my locks. So I don't really know how hard it is to pick like the door of a random door lock, whether it's an office door or a front door or things like that. I get a call from my wife in the middle of the day one day, and she's at work, which is a few blocks away, and she's a physical therapist. She goes, "Hey, we locked ourselves out of our office, and we were going to call a locksmith, but they're going to take like 3 hours to get here, and our boss is just like in a panic a bit. Can you come down and just open the door for us?" And I was like, yeah, no problem. I was like, I got this. It's probably a really simple office door. It's probably got like 3 pins in it or something, and I'll be able to get it open. So I go down there, and it is one of those really simple office doors, probably no security pins. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll have this open in like 2 minutes. And I put a tension wrench in there. I put a rake in there, and I'm raking back and forth. Lo and behold, it does not take 2 minutes. I'm there for like 10, 15 minutes trying to pick this really simple lock. And I have a moment where I'm like, wait. I turn to my wife and I go, which way do you turn this handle?
Oh,
Because it's one of the bar handles. It's not the knob handles. And she goes, she stops and takes a moment, and she goes, I haven't really thought about that explicitly, but let me approach to the door. And she goes, oh, I pull it up. And I went, I stick the rake back in, twist the other direction, put the rake in, and pop it open in one pat. Like it just goes pop and it comes. I'm just like, oh no, I look like a complete fool. Like I have been here for 10 minutes trying to pick the lock, and all I had to do was twist the handle in the opposite direction. But at the same time, you're sitting there going, oh no, I look like a complete idiot. And the people who don't know how to pick locks look at you like you're a wizard in that same moment. It's such a you're like, I have just owned myself in my own brain, and everyone still thinks I am a wizard. Like this is the weirdest situation I can imagine myself in.
I think I can fully say neither of us are like master lockpicks or anything like that.
No.
I've done there's a couple stories here, and they're both going to sound like a toot story. Like I have won a $150 set of lockpicks at GurCon for winning like their lockpicking contest. I won at DEF CON, the mecca of lockpicking. I won a contest which Tool put on, which was actually a really fun contest on lockpicking. I want to say but both of these felt more like beating the game than it was about lockpicking, because like the Tool one was, you had a table, you were blindfolded, both the tools went on the table, and a bunch of locks from all difficulties went on the table, and they had numbers on it that you couldn't see while you were blindfolded, so you had to reach around, grab your picks, and then pick them, call it out, set it down, and then go find another lock. So like this one was like game theory of like, I'll just do the easy ones. If I don't get it in 5 seconds, I'll just grab a next one. So it's like more game. But how often when you do pick a lock, do you still get that feeling of like, no, that shouldn't have opened? Like something that was more just a mistake than actually me doing something right.
I need to go pull my collection out because I've actually not picked a lock in probably 2 years. And I feel like now is the time to get that feeling on every single lock. And there are definitely locks in my collection I have never successfully picked.
Hmm. The
So, but yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely remember. Well, remember the first time you ever popped open a master lock by using a snake rake and you just stick it in, lift it up, and pull it back, and it just goes pop, and you're like,
yeah, you're
no,
like, yeah,
that was a
no.
mistake.
I think the funniest one for me was this. This was actually no. This wasn't even a self-owned. This is not a self-owned. This was like a total fluke of a scenario. Uh, I went visited Melissa in college, and when I was there, I parked in the parking structure, and at one point there must have been a sign I missed where they switch. So half the parking structure is for students, half it is for faculty, and at one point they flipped it over because it's a big university. Flip it on over so like there was like a ceremony or a wedding parking, and somewhere along the lines they moved it around. My car got trapped in they put a chain, and there was no way. So my only option is
yeah.
I'm sitting here going, I need to pick this chain. And I'm like, there's no way. Or I'm going to go to find staff. It wasn't like anything malicious. It was just someone made a mistake. So I go over and I'm thinking to myself, like, it's freezing cold outside. I'm going to pick this thing. And I try picking it. And as I'm picking it, I know I did not do it. My guess is it was just a faulty old lock, or it was just by some dumb fluke I pulled a pin. But on certain best locks, it was a best lock, you can remove the core. You have a core puller.
Yeah.
You have like the specialty. And as I was picking, the whole core came out.
Yep.
And it's if you turn it, I don't know if it's you turn it the wrong way or you go all the way around, but it doesn't unlock the lock. It just pulls the whole thing. Because now you have to put a flathead in there. So I'm like going around finding sticks and crap to stick in there to try and turn it. But that one was one. But the other one was like my brother. He locked himself out of his house and picked him in. And I found myself thinking, going, his wife's sitting there going, oh, you're so stupid, blah, 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 like, locked himself. But I realized how forgiving I am of other people's mistakes, and how if I found myself in this position, I'm like, you're such a fool. How did you do this? You're so dumb. Like, do you find yourself doing that too?
Yeah, I mean, that's just I just had that experience this week, right? Where I've been struggling to understand. Like, this is not easy. Like, I've been struggling to understand complicated specification language as to how a particular set of PCIe drivers are supposed to work. And I've been struggling with it for 2 years. And I had a Jimmy Neutron brain blast moment where the whole thing just made sense. Like, all of a sudden, I get it now. And then now looking back, I'm like, I had about a 5-minute period of time where I was like, I get it. This is awesome. I can go do the thing now. I am functional, blah, blah. And then after 5 minutes, the world slowly came crashing down on me, where I realized that everyone around me had realized this, had been working on this much longer and understood all of this. And they've been struggling to explain it to me for a very long time. And I'm just like, oh crap. Okay, this is not a good thing. Like, I had a 5-minute period where I was just like, I am God. And then immediately after that, I was like, oh, actually, you're just extra dumb. It took you way longer than it should have to understand how this works. That was a nice roller coaster.
That's like I find most CTFs I've done at DEF CON or any hacking contest, NSEC or any of them. You almost need two people, because one person will go down all the different like rabbit holes and red herrings. And there's so many stupid ones, even like when playing Darknet, because most cryptography and stuff is very straightforward. You have a challenge, you go do that challenge. You find a piece of something, you have an audio clip, whatever it is. It's a very obvious problem. Then you have like Gulo, who would put like random signs up, or a phone, and half the time like, they might not lead to anyone. Or like they had signs up around Darknet, which said like, Darknet area and soldering whatever, and then there'd be like a piece of Braille at the bottom. And the Braille was the challenge, but some of those ones where you're just like, sure, I'll go down this. But like, in full hindsight, you're like, oh yeah, it made sense. There's Braille right there. But how many others like normal signs around DEF CON have you gone, oh, I'm gonna follow this challenge, and it's like, oh, it's right near the bathroom, and I'm gonna pull the braille off of it. And you know what the braille says? Bathroom, because it's not a cryptography challenge.
It's just, yeah, it's not cryptide. It's just bathroom. That's good stuff. I have one more lockpicking story that is, that is a really great cell phone, and it's not the cell phone that you think it is. We were at work one day, and there was an IT closet that held all the spare parts for a variety of things, and on all the computers, and we were getting a new person onboarded, and there were no spare laptops or computers out in the open. It was all in the IT closet, and we had that locked because it needs to be locked. So, like, you don't want things to go missing. And we had one person with the key. This is how we learned that you're never to leave one person with a key to a critical area of the company. There was one person with the key, and that was a security person. Said security person had just gone on vacation for like 2 weeks, like just gone on vacation. So there was no way to get this new onboarded person a computer. And we were like, well, we're an office full of hackers, so this needs to happen. It's our company. We authorize ourselves to pick this lock. So we just go and we pick this lock and we open it up. We get them the computer, we lock it back up, and no, we leave it. We leave the IT closet unlocked because it's not going to be. We're going to need to get back into it sometime in the next 2 weeks. The security person comes back and is like, "Why is this door open? I definitely locked it before we left." And we were like, "We know. We had to get into it because it was required. Was required for critical functions of the business, and you're the only person with the key." And she was like, "Oh crap, you're right. Wait, how did you get in?" We're like, "We picked it open." She's like, "You can't do that. Like, that's not, you're not allowed to do that. You need to it created this whole moment of like, we authorized ourselves to get into our own equipment, but the corporate rules say that we broke into the building to get something that we were not authorized, because the person who has the key is the only person who's authorized to get into the thing." So the self-own was, we all suddenly had to take corporate security training again across the office building because we all allowed it to happen. And we were like, "Come on, this is your fault for not having a spare key with the manager, like, not our fault." And they're like, "Yeah, well, you should have handled this differently." I was like, we still, like, at the end of the day, we still would have picked the lock.
But you would have had, yeah. You would have had at least the forms filled out. TPS report.
Yeah, you would have had the forms filled out to let them know you're breaking the rules. And that's the lesson of the story. Always fill out the forms in triplicate before you pick a corporate lock.
Yeah, it's funny. Karthik was kind of like when you're searching for your wallet for hours around your house only to find it's in your pocket the entire time.
Dude, back when I wore glasses, that was like a yearly experience. I'd be like, "Oh God, where are my glasses?" He'd be looking around the house frantically, and he'd be like, "Oh, rub your forehead," and that's when he realized he's an idiot, because he'd be like, "Oh, my glasses are on my face." No wonder.
Or up here.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, before I got my laser eyes installed, I was I was legally blind in the sense that I was not allowed to drive without corrective lenses. So, like, the fact that I could even search for my glasses meant that they were on my face.
Oh, gosh, that reminds me, like, oh, this is going to be a little squeamish, but like, I got LASIK done, and there was definitely times before that, I tried to pull a contact out of my eye, and there's no contact in my eye. Like that, there's stuff like afterwards where it was like, no. Oh, that was. I remember those. Oh, LASIK was by far one of the weirdest experiences of my life.
My favorite part of LASIK was when they run that little tiny squeegee over the flap.
Just that one was it is amazing though. It's like 10 seconds per eye after like all the prep work is done. They're like, count back on from 10. I'm thinking about I think like the other funny story which came to mind was you as testers doing pen testing and things like that. There's a variety of things you look for, and there's so many times where it's like, I'm going to run a directory enumeration, which is like, I'm going to go to this website and I'm going to look through a massive list of word lists to see if those directories exist. And then like you run that and all of a sudden the whole server goes down. They're like, it stops responding to you. And you're like, one system shouldn't be able to do that. Like one system from my local system across the internet shouldn't be able to bring down a server. Then you start checking, you're like, okay, this is where VPNs do come in handy. We're like, is it just my IP address or you message another tester? You're like, hey, are you blocked from this too? Or am I blocked through the VPN? I mean, it's like, did I get failed ban or something like that? And one time we were testing a client. This was a decade ago, but we were testing and their server went down as we were doing this. And it was like doing like basic SQL injection, like put a single quote in, like 1 or 1 equals 1 type of thing. And then the whole system would go down. It's like, it wasn't that type of an injection. We're going through all these technical things of what it could be. We get the client. But what was happening is the moment we would do this injection, their entire network would go down. Their systems, they couldn't get out. Nothing in their systems could get out. Like their entire internet was shut down when this happened. So we're ripping through logs. We're ripping through database logs. Finally, like, do not do this attack again. Like, don't do it. So we're not going to do SQL injection. So we do cross-site scripting somewhere else. Whole network goes down. Any attack we would do, even the most like minute, most obvious thing, which we know, and then we even narrowed it down, is we sent a SQL injection which made no sense. We put it inside a form field that was like a not going into the database, and it got caught, like inside a header, and it got caught. Whole network went down. We realized they recently enabled the IPS feature, the intrusion prevention feature. Now it's fine. It's a fine feature to put in.
But little Bobby drop tables the IPS.
So what was happening was when you have a load balancer in front, instead of having the IPS in front, they had the load balancer because that made sense. They didn't want to the load balancer to also stop DOS and stuff like that. So they had 2 virtual IPSs behind it, and that's fine. There's other ways of setting it up, but it's fine. It's fine. But the thing was, the load balancer wasn't doing the IP forwarded by. So like, here is the IP address which it's coming from, and then it has its own internal IP address. It didn't include my IP address or the attacker's IP address. So the IPS, I was only seeing the load balancer's IP address. So when it would ban an IP address for the most basic attack, it was banning their own load balancer, which then shut down all the traffic from their internal network. And it was a fail in the sense that on them and whatnot, but it took us like an entire day to realize what was happening, because like we've never come across, like, it was such an obvious mistake to not include this header. But like, it was like, guys, don't do SQL injection anymore. It's like, okay, cool, we'll try cross-site scripting. Like, nope, don't do that anymore. Okay, we'll just try and modify an HTTP method from get to options or head, and then boom, it would throw away. Like,
congratulations, you've played yourselves. You can't test anything.
It was legitimately, we could not do a single test without bringing down the whole network. And what I haven't said is it was a financial firm. So it was it was just like, that was the one where it was like, guys, you cannot test. And we did figure it out, but it was, man, that one felt so bad. They're like, let's just do it after hours.
So have you ever signed yourself up for a job or a task or whatever, a favor for a friend that at its surface, you were like, yeah, no problem, I can do that. I can do some portion of this. There might be a piece of this that is beyond me, but we'll figure it out. And then you get in and maybe you scratch the surface, and then you just realize like, oh, I have gotten myself in way too deep, way in over my head.
Nothing immediately comes to mind. Do you have one in mind since you're asking the question?
So a friend of ours had a family member pass, and that family member had like 10 or 12 Android tablets, something like this. And they didn't have access to the password to get into them. And all they wanted to do was like go through the files really quick, make sure there wasn't anything critical on them, and then wipe them and then maybe donate them. But they couldn't get into them. And I took a quick look and I was like, oh, these are all like circa 2012, 2013. So I was like, all of these Android OS versions must be like busted. There must be exploits for these all over the place. I was like, so yeah, I'll take a look at it. And I was like, bring one of them over and I'll see if I can. She brings one over and I pop it in and I go online, I Google the model and I Google the Android version. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of end day tools that I can deploy and I pop it open. I was like, yeah, give me the rest of them. I'll take care of it. The rest of them show up. I do one more. I find the oldest one and I do one more and I pop it. And I was like, oh, this is going to be easy day. Like I'm just going to use this one exploit until I pops all of them. Yeah, that second one was the last one I could pop because the rest of them, I guess, were right on the precipice of Android used to be fundamentally insecure. Like it was just busted and not, and like you could basically just pop a shell using the ADB bridge and then not even pop a shell. You could just launch a shell using the ADB bridge and then just send it Linux commands more or less. And then at a certain point, they made it so that unless the device was rooted, you could open the shell, but there was an entire class of things that you just could not run because it would just disallow. And so they started putting a lot stronger sandboxing in. And that second tablet was like right before that version. And then the rest of them were not. But I had already given her the impression that I could, there's like 10 tablets that I could pop most of them. And so I was like, yeah, send it over. It'll take me a little while. And I went down the deepest rabbit hole trying to figure out how to, like, I found end days for a lot of these other ones, but it required me to like go find a memory leak so that I could put pointers into the end day. And so it was a multi-chained exploit, not just a out of the box, this works exploit. And I hadn't done any of that in so long, but I must have spent a month of my life over the course of a few months. Like this is all I did in the evenings trying to pop these other 8 tablets. And I just could not do it. And I like head hung low. I was like, I managed to unlock these 2, but the rest of these are too hard for me. You must take them back. I am sorry. Find a better hacker.
There has been a couple of those. I actually remember one, again, mobile, iOS. There has been, so there's a lot of times you pull on a test where you're like, I don't know how to do this, but I'll figure it out. And I know that sounds like, oh, I'll figure it out. But like a lot of security testing is not, I want to say standard tools. Like your job is to figure out how to break it as a pen tester. And it may not be something a technology you usually play with or whatnot, but ultimately it's communication. I'm going to get in the middle of it. Like it may require me like digging up like I remember thinking back to the testing industrial control systems and things like that, where you're pulling out like old school hub, not switch hub, because you could do a spanning port, but ultimately to be able to dump traffic. But the one which came to my mind was iOS constantly was adding new security features inside the operating system and things within applications. So historically, you load an application onto your iPad. This is like the old days, like iOS 4 and stuff like that. You'd load up an application, you'd load up a root certificate on the iOS device, and then boom, you can get all the HTTPS traffic back and forth. Like load up a root certificate, go set up a proxy, which it connects through, and then you're breaking SSL and you're fine. Like you can see all the communication of the application. Again, this isn't a hack or like I'm doing an O-Day. Like legitimately, I own the certificate authority. I can put my own root certificate on it, so I decrypt all the traffic. You had to do that, otherwise the application wouldn't actually have a root certificate to pull from. Point being is, you do this and you're like, oh, I know how to do this. And then new iOS comes out, new iOS. So when you're asked to do it again, you're like, yeah, I can do this. No problem. And then like most of the time it's like, it's fine. But somewhere around, I think it was like iOS 10, they came out with this idea of certificate pinning, which was when you push your application, you can lock it to a specific certificate. And no matter if there's a root certificate or not, this is it. Client pays us to do an application assessment, mobile application assessment. Yeah, we've done this a million times. No problem. Get the app. It has certificate pinning on it. Leads you down like a 3-day project of figuring out how you can. Oh, this was just like one of those ones where, why can't I? This is what I've done. And you're assuming it's your own hardware. You're like, oh, I can't get the certificate authority to like grab my root certificate. I'm not getting my communication through. You go, oh, well, how do I fix this? And since other people are having the same issue, you may or may not find something online if somebody else has this issue.
Yeah.
Leads you to, oh, I have to now re-sign. I have to unpack it, re-sign it, get rid of that code, and then load it back onto my device. Try and load it back into your device. This device isn't signed properly. Crap, how do I sign it properly? I need to go get a developer license, or I'll pay $100 to Apple to get a new developer license to now go decompile, re-sign all the binaries, put the whole thing in, rerun it on my system. I'm like, okay, I have a root certificate now. I'm all good. I'm ready to actually start testing. It's 3 days in. Go to test, and you see about half the communication. What the hell? Like, I'm so close. How can it half be working? So now you're diving back in to find out, they use Flutter. And Flutter has its own certificate authority inside the Flutter framework.
Oh.
So this is like a perfect example of one of those things. Is typically you go, I understand what I'm doing. Like often I understand what I'm doing. But that recent mobile one was the biggest, like, dude. I got it solved. Break certificate pinning. Got it solved. And then all the way down to Flutter. And you're just like, oh, and now there's specialty apps legitimately to rip down the CA out of the Flutter framework, rebind it. But finally, I just called the client and I was like, hey, we're figuring it out, but I need like 5 more days to get this thing done because I'm 4 days in and I've yet to actually do any testing on the application.
Security through war of attrition.
Oh,
it's like you're not actually testing anything at this point. You're just getting the development environment set up.
Mobile tends to be the bane of my existence because it changes so frequently. There's new frameworks and there's new junk in there they always have to rip away. But it's a battle of attrition. The other funny one I was thinking of as you were talking was TrueCrypt. You ever use TrueCrypt?
No, I have not.
All right, so TrueCrypt it's old. At this point, it's done.
It's like a BitLocker-esque thing.
Yeah, it was for encrypted containers, but there's a couple cool features. This was like, in college, you felt so cool. Like someone was going to come into your computer and steal your data of like your homework assignments, and you had to encrypt them because obviously you needed like 8 layers of decryption in there.
Oh, I've used this. Yeah, I know what this is.
And you could have an encrypted container. You'd also have a hidden encrypted container, but ultimately, if you wanted a 1 gig, high level, if you wanted 1 gig of storage, then you had to have a 1 gig file on your system, which would always be a gig, even if you only had like 2 megs in it. And then you'd have a hidden storage inside of that. In your infinite wisdom to hide this file, you would name it something like blah, blah, blah JPG, but there's no reason why you would have an image, which is 2 gigs or 3 gigs or 4 gigs.
Definitely not prawn.
So, So I had it MP4. It would make sense that you would have your hidden volume as an MP4, even though it's just an encrypted volume. It wouldn't play. You double click on it, it wouldn't play because it's an encrypted container. So I named it MP4. I had 8 gigs, and I had every piece of code I had ever worked on, every single homework assignment, every single thing I ever had in there. Fast forward about 6, 7, 8 months later, when I haven't used it for a while. My computer, as I'm doing like a stream or as I'm talking to people, my computer starts filling up with space, and I'm getting out of all the errors that you get when you run up. Your system can't do, and I'm trying to install a patch for a video game. I don't even remember what game it was. I don't want to admit to it, but I'm pretty sure it was World of Warcraft. I know. I was playing it. It was college. I knew people, but it was applying a patch. I was about to do a raid, which I never had done raids. It never worked out timing wise. So I was going to do one, but I was trying to patch. They were waiting on me. I was running out of space on my computer. So I looked for the first file available to be able to nuke, going like, what's taking up all this space? And I saw this like vaguely written MP4. I'm like, oh, it's like a DVD or something. Delete. This is too big for your recycling bin. Yeah, that's click, go, done. Right after I hit yes, and it has that little image of like the paper, it hits me. I'm like, no, cancel. And because it's fully encrypted, there's no header, there's no recovery. So immediately, like,
Oh
nuke
shoot.
everything. So like I'm pulling up like goodness, every single forensics tool I could possibly think of to try and recover it because this was like
No, because as soon as one
years.
page is gone, the whole thing is done, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was that well even if it just blows it away from the TOC. That's the thing. It's like a table of
Yeah.
contents and it didn't touch any like this is what killed me. I knew all the file was there. The entire file was sitting on my hard drive, uncorrupted, unwritten over, or anything like that. More than likely because I realized it before I started installing the patch. It just blew it away from the TOC, but because it's all random data, you would have had to have it perfect. Oh, that was the biggest self out
Yeah,
I
it
think
would
I have
need to
ever
be
done.
it would need to literally be in the order you needed it to be. Yeah, you wouldn't have been able to cobble it back together.
Yeah, that one I still
Ooh.
feel sore about that one over multiple decades later because like my first exploit I ever wrote was like Unreal Tournament 2004. That's the one I had like wrote a white paper on and released it. All the research. So all I have from that entire time was just the white paper, which is published online. But it was all of the raw packet captures and like all the nostalgia of it of like my baby's first like I had my first like real exploit and it was all inside that thing. So that one still kills me two decades later. World of Warcraft is that this is the lesson is World of Warcraft ruins everything.
Everything it touches.
Everything it touches.
That's funny.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean the last story I have. Oh yeah, let's go to comments.
yeah, I see Nick
Hey,
Green. Nice seeing you, Gator. You as well. It's been a while. I see Braden. I saw your story. That's a fun one. Yeah, security was adamant that someone brought. Oh goodness, that's a terrible option. I'm just looking at this comment that you had to bring. Oh goodness. Yep, had to bring a firearm into the building in order to put down
no,
a PC, wasn't it?
no. A long time ago, the QA team took an old PC out of the building on a Friday and took it to a range and shot holes in it, and then brought it back on Monday. And security was adamant that someone had brought a weapon into the building because it was not possible that anyone could get a PC out of the building. Like, no, you can't. No one can carry a machine out of the building unnoticed. Like that, impossible.
This reminds me of like the ladder. You can get anywhere inside a building while carrying a ladder because no one's going to stop someone carrying a ladder. No
Yeah.
one's if you carry an entire desktop or PC out of a building, no one's going to stop you because
Yeah.
it makes sense that like I'm not going to stop them, especially if you hold two of them, because unless they
Yeah.
offer to carry one of them for you, no one's going to stop you on that one.
They'll open the door for you.
But yeah, that TrueCrypt one, even again decades later, I'm still sore about it.
That's funny. Last story I have is we're going back to one of my prior workplaces, the same place that the lockpicking happened. We had a Windows XP machine, and this was like right in the grand transition from like everyone was moving to Windows 10. So there was still Windows XP machines laying about. Like they were definitely not functional and they needed to be decommissioned aggressively at the time. Because if you're not aware, Windows XP is a fundamentally broken operating system. Every Windows XP machine in existence right now can be popped with very little effort, and
Yeah,
it's like
Eternal Blue.
unfixable. Yeah, Eternal Blue, and like it's unfixable, right? So we had this XP machine that had a bunch of critical documents on it that I guess no one decided to actually take the time to back up, and it was encrypted to their to their credit. But it was crypted in like the BitLocker sense. So like you unlock the whole drive and then you can get into Windows, right? And we had the BitLocker password, but it had been sitting around for so long. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but we lost the password to actually get into the machine with administrator passwords. And the person who was responsible and was actively using it had left the company. And we didn't have access to their password. I don't know that they left on good terms, so no one was going to call them to ask, and they may not even provide, whatever the case was. So we had to get in, and it was like critical. So we just launched Eternal Blue or whatever it was, whatever they called it at the time, to just pop it open, got it open, clone the drive, and called it a day. And again, at some, and this is in like the heyday of probably circa 2013 or something. Yeah, heyday of security. It's like a decade ago. Oof.
Oh man.
And so like there was still this like thought amongst corporate types that, yeah, you can do this as a job, but never use this against your own assets. In the same way that you're not supposed to pick your own locks, right? Like, use them responsibly. But like, if critical company functionality requires that we recover this thing, and we have the tools to do it ourselves without spending tens of thousands of dollars, we authorize ourselves to do the hacking against our own equipment, right? Just be responsible about it. This is another story where security was not happy. They were like, "What do you mean you hacked our own stuff?" And we were like, "Well, it's the same thing as the lock picking thing. Like, we had to get into the machine to get the documents we had access to literally yesterday, or like the day before, that we no longer had access to. And this was the quickest and most efficient way of going about it. We have authorization to access this machine. We just needed to utilize this method to do this." And that caused a whole flurry of corporatism as well. That was just like, oh, I guess we're going on the corporate training session again because someone decided to use an exploit instead of a password. And we're like, what's the difference? We have authorization to get into. We had I don't want to say it was a nonstop stream of corporate being angry at us for doing our jobs. Because they didn't comprehend that there isn't really a difference between us typing a password in and launching an exploit.
There's so many funny, like, not even necessarily like my problem, your problem, but just so many things in hindsight that no one said anything. I think about like landman hashes, because that's when you're talking about XP. So like all hashes were done in landman and not before NTLM, and it would segment it. It pretty much just cut it off at 7 characters. So if you cracked up to 7 characters, you had the password, or split it into multiple. Yep. It always amazed me like that was, I get the idea. They're like, oh, quantum computing will crack everything. But like at a certain point, like that one in hindsight was like, that's not that far off where we can crack 7 characters. I don't know. The other funny one I was thinking about was on a internal network. There is so many, just like you were saying, like, oh, you're not allowed to run those tools. There is so many times on internal pen test where we hit 2 things. One, that the idea that their own security team isn't allowed to do the things that they're paying us to do, which I just think was funny. Like they're like, you clearly know what you're doing, so we're gonna authorize that team. Or like pulling down tools internally where we're not able to download the security tools because it will get hit by their internal proxy, like as hacking. So you're like, okay, I'll download them and then shove them down like through SSH. But I was thinking early days, like you were saying like you downloaded Eternal Blue. There was this beautiful spot in history, like when Millworm was a thing. Did you ever use Millworm?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I haven't heard that term in a long while.
So before Exploit DB and offensive security kind of took that over, there was Millworm, which was like, you could put exploits on there. Like there was I'm not sure if there was a known time there was malware. Now there was like other people's shells in there. Like if they had exploit code in there and you just ran it out flat, they would have their own payload in there. So you had to rip away their payload and put your own payload in. So like you could self-exploit and whatnot. But there was this beautiful time in history where it was like a very trusted place to pull down exploit code, which was just doesn't really exist. Exploit DB does a pretty good job now. But I was thinking back to like early days and how many times you would do like on the internal network. It was a lot of like man the middle, like man the middle, everyone to me, break SSL, start looking at credentials, and then use those credentials to then start getting into the network. But how many times I look back going, it was fine back then. Like it was understood like this was okay to do. But now, if you could do the same thing, like you would be like thrown out of the building, because what you were doing back then is you would stand up your own DNS server internally, and you still do this now. Respond to everyone quicker than they can. Then you will always respond faster than the external DNS. Same thing, DHCP. But that's the thing is like early days, you would modify routes. You would like hand out like set a malicious DHCP server internally. And if you did this now, I cannot help but think like, especially on any type of manufacturing or anything like that, they may kill you. Not even like, they'll throw you. They may actually beat you to a bloody pulp. Because if you spin up like a malicious DHCP server on some of these networks, where back then it was like, it's fine. We'll just spin up rogue DNS, rogue DHCP, a secular route. Why not? It's fine. And I think as time has gone on, I've now worn, baby gloves more and more when it's come to internal network, because they've just gotten large and unwieldy of not knowing where, we'll say, all the bodies are buried and what the ramifications are if you do any of these things.
It's kind of, it is kind of crazy. I just thinking about it, like as you move to more of the cloud structure, as you move to more of the, we'll say, larger enterprise networks that are these massive behemoth blobs of unknown in every corner, just how easy it would be to set up a malicious service like that, and how hard it would be to prevent being caught. Like we're in a weird spot where like we have this giant gooey center that's easy, that's easy to move about once you're inside the hard outer shell in most major networks. Like once you crack the outer shell, moving from place to place tends to be not as difficult, depending on, as long as you're not crossing major enclaves, for example. But like if you wanted to set up one of those services internally, it would probably get caught pretty fast these days. Whereas, during that time, circa, we'll even say 2010 to like 2015, that stuff could be running in perpetuity for years and no one would ever notice.
And even like think about some of the exploits that existed, like when Facebook, there was like Firefox extensions like Firesheep that would just sit on the open network and grab everyone's like Facebook session, and you'd sit in people's Facebook session, and that was like a Firefox extension. It was amazing.
I mean, what was it doing? Just like swiping cookies or something like that?
Yeah, it would swipe a session cookie, and then you jump into people's Firefox or their Facebook sessions. So all their chat and everything like that you're now them. It was full cookie. It was amazing how much like security really, like some of these attacks became so like silly mainstream. Like again, like load an extension and activate it, and then you're set. I think the one which blows me away as like giant fails, and this isn't like my fail, but like, it blows me away that some of these cloud services, let's use Office 365. If you're on Office 365, you're an enterprise, giant corporation, you can go to portal with any user on the entire network. You're an 8,000 person company. You can go to portal.azure.com. You get access to the Active Directory, and you can pull a full listing of every single username. This is by design.
I don't like that. No, I
don't like that either. In like where I understand, like while the global address book needs to be there, but this means like any single user that's popped in the entire network can pull down every single person's username. And Microsoft's response to this is that's a feature. That's by design. Like same thing, like your deployment, so many of your deployment buckets within like Power Apps and all these other things on Office 365, the deployment bucket's open. And now it's obscured. It's a random obscured URL. But if you hide your entire app between single sign-on, it's fully opened. And it's amazing how much I think we're going to look back in 5 to 10 years from now and go, even now we look back 5-10 years and we go, how in the world did they let that happen? How in the world was that like a thing? We just hit this with WPA2. How in the world was there not 802.1 HRM one of them, where they encapsulated the management frame. So where you can deauth, where you can just like legitimately, if you don't have that protection turned on, you're like, I can just wipe everyone off of the thing.
Well, it's not that hard to understand how this happens. Like, specifications are hard to write. Somebody writes the specification, and then 5 years later they found out that they left an ambiguity in, and everyone implemented it differently. Like, that's how it works. And then the industry finally comes to the conclusion of like, oh, we have to weigh breaking the specification against continued user support. So we're just going to go with the continued user support rather than adhering to this particular thing. What it comes down to is when the WPA mechanism was written, nobody foresaw deauth being able to be used in that way. And that's what it comes down to.
Fair. But I think this is the thing is like 10 years later, you had Droid Sheep. Great game. That was the one for Android. So there was Fire Sheep for Firefox, Droid Sheep for Droid Sheep, but there was like just hijacking people's sessions, like in like button clicks. But I think like when we look at 10 years ago and you're like, there was so many stupid things we did back then because it was just trust. And then you go, I hear stories from like my 100-year-old grandmother who's like, oh yeah, I used to go into the bank and pull money out of my neighbor's account because they would ask for money. Like that, we look back and go, like, how in the world did that ever happen? And I'm wondering 10 years from now, what we look at now, which ultimately, like, so many of the frameworks that have come out, I would say are mostly security through obscurity because we're still finding new exploits on them. But I'm wondering in 10 years what we're going to look at this moment and go, how in the world did we ever let that happen?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like if we were to sit down and think about it, we could probably come up with one or two, but right off the top of my bat, the hard part is like, you're basically saying, what are we not foreseeing? Quantum computing and AI is going to eat all. That's what we're not foreseeing. How could we possibly have allowed the demon to actually get created? Somebody wrote a plan, like somebody wrote a book that explained exactly how this would go, and we just ignored the warnings.
The thing which blows me away with Daniel Suarez's book is I always have to remember, like, there was the automates inside Damon, where it was the automatic driving cars. Those weren't, like, right now, that doesn't sound like that crazy. Like, it doesn't sound like, that's all that nuts. When he wrote it, those were a pipe dream.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was definitely, I feel like those have been in sci-fi for 40 years, 50 years.
Oh,
even.
Yeah. Demolition Man.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Demolition Man. But like, yeah, it was still very much a pipe dream. It was the equivalent of a flying car in terms of pipe dream. We were like, aha, everyone said we'd have flying cars by 2015, but we all know they're never going to happen. Nope. Now the self-driving cars are completely a thing. In Arizona, you can get was it like Waymo or whatever? You can just like call one up and it'll come get you.
I had to laugh. What was you said flying cars, and I forgot who it was who just came out with us, that it was a single occupant drone inside the car. Like it was a concept car, but they built I think they built a functional one. But it was like there was the drone you roll back out of the back of the car, and then you have your own personal drone. Like I think the ones that are going to probably look back. I think the biggest one we're going to look back on is OAuth and single sign-on. And let's use this example. So you have single sign-on with Google. You have single sign-on with Microsoft, meaning like I can authenticate to other services using it.
Yeah.
There is an incredible amount of endpoints that support OAuth. And it's been shown already, like there was all the protections that are baked into OAuth are implemented on the main authentication points within Microsoft, but they haven't enforced all those same ones across the thousands and thousands of other endpoints. Example, say one of the authorizers on the main endpoint makes sure that you're using RS and RS 512 encryption or 256, where the other endpoint at Microsoft will allow no encryption, and it would be like a random blob storage endpoint. And I think we're going to find one flaw in the authenticator. and realize there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of endpoints that we need to fix. I don't know. Like I say that one, yeah, I can say the exact same thing about CrowdStrike. Like when that went down, that was a global phenomenon to recognize how many people use it.
Yeah, but for us, we're like, it's Tuesday. Yeah, we all foresaw this coming. Like we've been saying this for years on the stream that this was going to happen eventually. Like kernel level anti-cheat is fundamentally bad for the industry, bad for users, bad for all these things. Just like in kernel, not even anti-cheat, but just like in kernel protections like this, it's just a rootkit by another name, and when it breaks, it gonna break. Like it gonna break real good.
The thing is, though, like, the kernel level anti cheat, it's only going to affect gamers. Like this affected everything.
No, for
like,
sure.
This blew me away. Same concept.
Thing. It's the same. It's not even the same concept. It's the same thing.
So
they are fundamentally the same.
So what I'm hearing is, even though you and I have had tremendous screw ups, there is always a bigger fish.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your final thoughts on this?
Never get so big that your screw ups get you dragged into Congress.
What's your final thoughts?
I think we're going to try, this is more for the audience. I think we're going to try something new in the coming weeks. We may start playing a little bit of games on stream as we talk. Nothing too crazy. Silk had a suggestion. What was the first one we were going to try?
Hidden in plain sight.
Hidden in plain sight. So we'll probably come up with some topics to talk about. Maybe eventually we'll even do some video game hacking on stream. We'll see. We got to find some good targets. That would be fun.
We'd break game cheat engine. That'd be a fun one.
Yeah. I mean, we could do that live. That would be fun if we can get it pre-set up and then we turn it into a game of who can break the game the fastest. I gotta relearn game cheat engine a bit, but I can't imagine it's that difficult.
That would be fun. Have a good race on that one. Might have to get Gulo and Gator involved. We need to referee it. Yeah. I don't know. My final take on this is like, I do think when you make your own screw ups, it's really difficult to like forgive yourself. You have to forgive yourself before you forgive, and then you can forgive others. Like I think it's really hard on your own mistakes. I do think after being into the industry and being as old as I am, you forgive yourself of your mistakes quicker, maybe. But I think when you're seeing them in other people, it's very easy to forgive, unless it's CrowdStrike, and then it's totally their fault. And I don't know how anyone would forgive themselves ever.
Like there was the news report. We could kind of end on this. Well, two things. One, Motaria said, "Have you ever played Hacknet?" There's a game on Steam called Hacknet, and it's the closest I think you can get to something being a game and actually having a good amount of representation of what launching, like being a very well-funded script kiddie would be like. Like the payloads are still like they exist, but you don't need to know how they work. You just acquire things and then launch, but you're still having to like do intelligence collecting against emails, go through file systems, find different things like that. But like actually knowing how to write an exploit is not a part of the game. But it would be a fun one to like sit down and live review.
How close is it to Uplink? Do you remember the game Uplink?
Oh, I know the name, and I'm pretty sure I've played it, but I couldn't tell you. I'd have to go look it up.
What one came first? HackerNet. I have to imagine Uplink came first. Uplink versus HackerNet.
That's also on Steam. Hacknet.
That would be fun.
Yep.
I don't know if any of these more than one person, or can one person just completely bumble themselves through?
These are one-person games, but I feel like we could go back and forth on stream and try that. Like that would be fun.
There we go. With that though, I mean, I don't have anything else minus like there has been a number of complete bungles over my life. Luckily, I think most of them I've been able to recover from. Actually, I'd say all of them been able to recover from. I think the lock picking ones are still to this day. Every time I get a lock open, it still feels like a fluke. It doesn't feel like a skill thing. It just feels like I accidentally did a thing.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
this,
my last thought I was going to leave on was you were talking about like, oh, you look at other people's flukes like that or mistakes or whatever, and you're quick to forgive, but for your own mistakes, you'll beat yourself up forever. It's like recently there was the whole report about the Treasury getting hacked, and like people are all up in arms are like, oh, how could we be so stupid and all this stuff, and you and I are looking at this going, oh, it's Tuesday, whatever.
that's
Like they'll
Tuesday.
be fine, they'll figure it out. We'll find out in like 3 weeks that the security firm that was hired to fix it, they themselves got hacked too. So like,
Oh yeah. And then they put it,
not
then
saying
they
that,
put,
not saying that happened. Just to be clear.
then they put their reports in like an open bucket, and the open bucket was picked up by like Google.
Yeah,
Those are the ones which always baffle me, is when they put something in an open bucket and then Google indexes it and crawls it, and someone Googles the company and finds it as the top result. Google, best
dude.
hacking tool.
Brayden said, "Oh, deleting the entire demo in the middle of giving the demo." The number of this is why I always refer to the demo gods, if the demo gods are kind, and why I have stopped doing live demos.
I'll do a
Yeah.
video. So what I'll do is I'll do a video before the live demo and have that in my back pocket. So if I need to play it, I can, but then do the live demo. But it's they never go right. There's so many, especially when it's any hacking stuff. Those ones I feel like very rarely go right. That's a whole thing in and of itself, by the way, is the creating challenges for hackers is one of the most frustrating things, especially when it's real exploits. When it's like cipher or cryptography or things like that, because you need to make them exploitable, not exploitable. Like a buffer overflow, most of the ones we had to program couldn't be a real buffer overflow. Is when these conditions are hit, go ahead and dump this section of memory and then go execute this. I mean, Docker and other VMs have made this easier, but oh man, a lot of those have been frustrating.
That's why when I wrote my hacking challenges for Darknet, I think it was Darknet 8. The ones that are tutorialized, like I'm going to teach you a little bit of assembly and you're going to get to run some actual exploits. All of the exploits were like 1 or 2 byte payloads, and the whole thing was designed such that there was no way you could actually put something in that would give you a shell. Except in very specific environments, I would give you access to a shell that would allow you access to like a cheroot jail on the box, which like if you wanted to get on, but like it was on some random cloud server. So whatever, I would just revert it back to the last good image. Right. But all of those were designed so that you could just like, you could guess the answer to it. You just had to put the right byte in. It was just quicker for you to learn the thing instead of, it's really, I spent months building that 8 or 10 challenge line, which ended with teaching you how to do baby's first ROP. And but working through how to puzzle together a puzzle that was simple enough but was still a real exploit was so difficult.
It's like one of you people watching was the one who did it when we got the shell at the soda machine at DEF CON and I showed it on screen. Yep, someone pulled that thing and immediately like RM-RF, and it's like you.
Sons of bitches.
I was laughing because between that one and the one actually which kind of solved this is the way you can design them. Zero Altitude made the Crucible challenge for one of the Darknet years. And I think it was 1 minute. You had 1 minute to solve all the flags before the box rebooted. So you pretty much the only way to solve it would be to script everything up and give yourself like go log in, dump all the files, then you look through them locally. So it was like every 1 minute someone could run an exploit on the box because that was the end goal, was exploit the box, get the flag. But you only had 1 minute. So even if someone got a shell and blew it away, it's like it resets in 1 minute. That was a fun challenge.
It's not stupid if it works, right? Like them's the rules.
That was a fun challenge. With that, then, either way, thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning, as we're always here every week without ever skipping one ever. Right?
Consummate professionals.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us. And as always, hack on.